Let's say we want to improve the matching algorithm for drivers and riders for Uber. The engineering team has added a column to the drivers table with a weighted value for better matching. Given this table of drivers, write a query to perform a weighted random selection of a driver based on the driver weight. So first off, how would you approach this problem, Rahul?
Yeah, so I think I'd want to understand like why we want to do this. So essentially, from what I gather, different drivers have different values. So they've been allocated weights according to that value over there. And essentially, when we are doing the matching, real-time matching, we want to allocate more weight to certain drivers. So the objective of this exercise is basically to randomly allocate drivers based on the weights that they have. Like my approach over here would be to kind of like use like rand function in SQL. So rand basically allocates it's like a uniform random, it's like uniformly distributed between 0 and 1. So you get any random value over there in the middle. And I would first want to kind of like figure out, let's say, the cumulative weights for a particular driver, and then kind of like calculate share of the weights allocated to a particular driver, and then compare that with the, let's say, the random number that I have. On the basis of that, I'll select like one driver which fulfills that criteria, if that makes sense.
Okay. Can you kind of showcase a quick example by chance? Maybe with the
Sure.
editor?
Let's say we have, for example, this ID1 has weight of 2, ID2 has weight of 4 rather, and ID3 has a weight of 1. So what I want to do is kind of like get a cumulative sum over here. So this would basically be this I'll add like basically I'm just getting the cumulative sum of weights till then.
Yep.
And also I am getting basically total. So total like possible weight we have is like 7 over here. So I'll create a column for that as well. And then 4, 3, 7, and 7. So
Yeah, I
what
think you
I
had
would
ID
want,
1, 2, and 3, right? On the
yeah,
first
yep, yep,
column. Yeah.
yep, yeah. Yeah. So this is basically like I'll try to create a table like that. And then what I want to do is essentially wherever my cumulative sum is basically more than the rand into 7, for example, the total, I'll basically select the first kind of like driver after that. So
Okay.
if I have to write it in terms of a query, I'll start off with first creating. So essentially starting off with the CTE, which will calculate this. So select ID weighting using now window functions to kind of like get the cumulative weights. And also total weights. So essentially this thing over here is basically what I illustrated earlier. And now I would wanna basically select ID from cum weights, basically the CTE which I created, where the cum weight is more than total weight into rand function. So essentially, and I'll limit it to 1. So what I'm trying to do here, this is like a uniform in SQL. I think this is fairly straightforward, fairly uniform across all editors. This rand function takes a uniform distribution of 0 and 1, between 0 and 1, and it'll basically generate a value. So wherever cum weight is more than total weight into some value which it throws, I'll basically select the first kind of like driver from there, which fulfills the criteria. And that's how I'll basically get the weighted driver over here.
Cool.
Let
So
me
I think you have
try.
to remove that first.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah. Let me try. Huh.
And let's try running it. And we do have a Monte Carlo simulation for this on Interview Query, but sometimes I haven't seen anyone pass a test case, so it might be broken actually. Oh, it looks like there's another error in your code. So it doesn't look like you're selecting from a table on the first one.
Oh yeah, sorry. The rookie mistake.
All right, so yeah, I think maybe we have a bug. So I was looking at the stats. If you go up to the stats, it says that yeah, if you look at the stats, we don't have any accepted submissions. So it looks like, okay, well, that's weird. Average number of submissions run total. Okay. I think generally, let's go back to your code and
Yep.
debug, just kind of read through it. So we're summing the weighting over ordered by the ID. We sum the weighting over as a total. And then basically we're just checking to see if the cumulative weight is greater than the total weight. And then we're limiting by 1 to get that first ID, right?
Yep.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
essentially, like this will just throw in, this is like a uniform distribution from 0 to 7, like in this case 7, essentially, because this function is essentially doing that, and I'm just comparing it with this and just getting the first kind of like driver over here. So I mean, this in SQL, I think like this might be kind of like efficient, but I guess in Python, there are like other ways to also kind of do this.
All right, let's jump on to the next question. So let's say that you're working as a data scientist at Amazon Prime Video, and they're about to launch a new show, but first want to test the launch on only 10,000 customers first. So first question would be, how do we go about selecting the best 10,000 customers for the pre-launch? And then what would the process look like for pre-launching the TV show on Amazon Prime to actually measure how it performs?
So I think like I'll probably start off with like just giving you my understanding of the question, and then just provide you like a framework of how I would kind of like address each of these subparts. I mean, we can go like subpart by subpart as well and carry on the discussion from there. I can start off. So essentially, like the question over here is saying that I'm a data scientist and Prime Video is like about to launch a new show, and we want to test the launch on only 10,000 customers. So with that amount of context, I would want to break down into like why would Prime Video just want to launch like a new show to just like 10,000 users? Like what are the various use cases for which this is like a feasible idea? And also like what are some how does like Prime Video operate? What are some North Star goals over there of Prime Video in order to do this? So essentially I can kind of like start off with what Prime Video is about. So Prime Video is essentially like a streaming service on Amazon rather, and essentially the main aim is to provide value to Prime subscribers over there and basically help them in retention efforts of Prime subscribers. So it's part of the bundle service, and the aim is to provide Prime subscribers enough value that they renew Prime subscription as a whole. So that's kind of the like Prime subscriber retention would be the main kind of the North Star goal of Prime Video, just to start off this. Secondly, like I want to deep dive into like why we would want to just like while launching a new show, only testing it out on 10,000 customers. So like first use case might be that Prime Video wants, so this might be some kind of a pilot effort, for example, for like a new TV show. And Prime Video wants like some content specific feedback from these like select set of customers initially so that they can improve their offering. Second big reason could be they are basically Prime Video interface has like multiple landing pages and multiple product offerings, and usually a new content is launched through a carousel. So if there's a new carousel over there, we might want to understand like how users are perceiving that new carousel where this new content is being showcased at the start. So basically carousel improvement would be another kind of like big use case over here, like how users are perceiving it. Then there are other use cases around, let's say this particular new content is a live sports kind of a game, for example. So let's say Prime Video is launching a new feature. This content is part of the new feature. So how users are using that particular new feature or new content, in this example like live sports, would be another use case for why we need to launch it for just a limited set of users. Then
Okay.
finally we also like I'll use live TV content as new features. Then for like another one would be like we want to test out like in-app stuff. For example, Prime Video has a feature called X-ray, where you can clearly see on any moment of the screen, you can clearly see who are the actors, like who's the director, what song is playing. So basically, you might want to do some usability testing around X-ray also, and also like subtitles, for example, and even like language conversion. So these are like some product specific things which might be related to why we want to launch it out on to just a select few group of customers. So I'll pause here for a bit in case you have any questions or feedback on whether these like use case are sufficient or not for this type of problem.
Yeah, and we're talking about specifically the first one, right? Where we're trying to understand basically, obviously content feedback is the first one where I definitely understand it. And I do think like the other ones seem more specific edge cases for the type of content that might be launched. So we do know if it's like a new show, I mean, I'm going to say that it won't be, I guess, how does that relate, I guess, back to the carousel improvement and like the live TV content or like the new features?
Yep. For example, Carousel, let's say Jack Ryan is a new show, which is like a flagship show on Prime Video. And
Yep.
it's specific, there's a dedicated space for just Jack Ryan on Prime Video's landing page. So it could be an important thing to. So basically, everything
Ah,
Jack Ryan will be on that specific carousel. So which is
gotcha.
why it would be important to test out this
Okay.
particular thing. Yep.
Okay. Cool.
So, but fair point. Like, for the purpose of this exercise, I'll just kind of like focus on content specific stuff
Gotcha.
directly.
Okay.
So,
Cool.
so next part would be, so we wanna, how do we go about like selecting like 10,000 customers basically over here? So essentially, you would wanna look at a few things over here, like few dimensions which would be important to understand, which would be important as part of the targeting criteria to select these customers. First, their like product usage data. So are they active users of Prime Video or not? Then also, I guess like, are they active on Prime or not? So we want to understand, like one possible use case could be like, we want to understand, are there like any inactive users of Prime Video who would be, let's say, convinced to start streaming on Prime Video because of this particular content. So
Mm.
we do want to get some feedback from these type of users. Secondly, genre-based activity is important. So let's say this new show is like Jack Ryan, for example, which could be categorized under like, let's say, action or mystery, for example. So we want to ensure that we have a sufficient number of people who fall under like watch action type of content as well. Then we want to also look at like how this show is perceived across geographies. For example, Prime Video is like basically available on more than 100 countries. So we do want to see like how this show is perceived across like diverse geographies. So that's like another thing that is kind of important. Fourth one is like we ensure that all types of customer segments are adequately captured. For example, new versus returning, or highly engaged versus, let's say, cold start users. So we want to ensure that our sample size is representative of Prime Video in general. And also, like, we want to ensure, since it's a smaller set of customers, 10,000 users, we could also launch like a survey, like a qualitative survey for some of these users who are interested in like basically answering like certain questions around the show, around the overall product experience. So we want to ensure that like high response, we have enough users with higher propensity to respond on surveys as well. So this is like another thing which we want to kind of like incorporate into our like targeting criteria over here. High
All right.
response rate.
Yeah. So it looks like they're pretty diverse segments that could be interesting to analyze over time. And then also, actually, if you want to click on the bottom right corner, you can drag actually this thing down. So you can have
Oh,
more.
okay, got it. This makes
Yeah.
sense.
All
Yeah.
right, so let's talk about then. I think we're cutting down to like a point now where a question I have is just like, do we want a random sample of the existing demographic uniformly, or are we specifically trying to segment for like some kind of features here? Because it sounds like from what you're saying that there are like specific actual, like dimensions here that we want to take care of that the customers are a part of. But is this something, when you say genre-based activity, is it something that where every person has to be interested in action if it's a Jack Ryan film that we want to select? Or do we also want to select people that are not interested in action in our customer base?
Yep. So my like framework would be to look at this from twofold angles. Like one is to have sufficient number of customers who are basically the immediate like focus audience for this type of a show. And
Okay.
also second set of audience would be our more representative Prime Video sample. So two approaches to this. One, immediate focus audience. Basically, for example, Jack Ryan, like action oriented folks living in
Yep.
US, for example. And second one, representative of Prime Video audience in general. So each of these like segments will have different types of insights from which we can, gather feedback. So that would be my approach to go around this. So for two specifically, we could do something like stratified sampling over here, essentially ensuring that each of these segments that we have identified are in fact representative of the overall proportion of Prime Video audience. And first one would be just taking like random sample of our target audience over here.
And then let's go into, I guess, the second part of the question, which is then how would we actually go about, pre-launching the show and measuring how it performs and evaluating the success here?
So this is like another thing I would want to discuss. First, like pre-launching the TV show on Prime Video. I mean, essentially the objective over here would be to understand what is the impact of this particular show on Prime Video's like overall goals. For example, that's one thing. However, there are like negative experience problems over here. For example, if you launch a particular show to just a limited set of people, it'll kind of like have a negative effect on people who were not selected for that particular show, especially if the show has like high interest levels. For example, if it doesn't have high interest levels, I guess like it can be a good exercise. But having said like that's one caveat I wanted to like highlight over here. But if I had to, let's say, kind of like design a test over here, so essentially first thing would be like what is the overall hypothesis of this particular test, or like what is the overall goal of this particular test. So hypothesis is that this new show will help in, let's say, user retention on Prime Video. So you can go about it two ways. It'll help in user retention in Prime Video through the fact that like we'll have more minutes streamed on Prime Video per user.
Okay.
Yeah, so that could be like one like overall goal is of Prime Videos, of course, to increase streaming minutes per user, which will lead to higher retention. So that's like the hypothesis I'm driving at over here. Second step would be to identify like primary metrics, your secondary metrics, and also your guardrail metrics over here. So primary metrics we kind of like identified over here, essentially your streaming minutes per user. So the idea is that this show is introduced and it will lead to an increase in streaming minutes. Secondary metrics, there are like certain metrics associated with this. For example, your week over week retention within the like during the experimentation phase. Also, you would want to again look at like visits to PV as a whole. These are like
Mm-hmm.
some secondary metrics, and like guardrail metrics are also important. We want to ensure that there are no like negative repercussions of launching this particular show. So over here we could look at, let's say, customer feedback. For example, if it's like a particularly contentious show, it would obviously generate like a lot of feedback in terms of customer support tickets or even on like social media. So we have to kind of like monitor that as well. And of course, streaming minutes per user, needless to say, shouldn't be going down. So already kind of like part of the guardrail, but this is like some other guardrail metrics that we are thinking about. So we started off with the hypothesis, primary metrics, secondary metrics, and guardrail metrics. Now I would want to talk about the kind of the different groups over here for this experiment. So we have a treatment where we have 10,000 users who were shown, who are eligible to basically see this show, and then the rest is basically control over here. So we want to ensure that both treatment and control over here are kind of like representative of each other. They should be like probabilistically equivalent in order for this test to be valid. So that's like one thing we want to ensure, like it has to be probabilistically equivalent in order to launch a test.
Yeah.
And this is like, and there are various ways to do it. For example, I talked about like stratified sampling earlier. Essentially, the idea would be to compare these metrics between treatment and control group after the test ends. And now also another important thing is like duration of experiment. So this is important because we want to have the experiment live for sufficient amount of time. One way to think about it could be like, how much is the average duration? Like, for example, there's a new TV series that is being launched. So for an average customer, how much time do they usually take to complete like a TV show? So that could be one input which goes into this particular like component. Then we can also use prior like experiment data to understand this particular problem. Like how much time does it usually take for Prime Video to have like 10,000 active users like logging in, which is basically our treatment. So that's the other component which goes into this. That's the other thing which will go into this. The other way could be through like power analysis, but since we already have kind of like an idea that it'll be 10,000 users, we won't really go for like power analysis over here, but that's like another consideration for us.
Okay, cool.
And so I guess like going back to the question, yeah. So these are kind of like different components over here, and we kind of like launch the experiment, measure when the experiment ends, we kind of like look at the differences between the metrics that we identified, and also then conduct like statistical tests to understand if they are like statistically significant or not, and also understand the variation between different segments as well that we identified earlier. So that's like a quick way on how I would design this particular test or experiment.
All right, I actually want to do a good retro on this because I like the thoroughness in your answer, but I want to know like what do you think about this question first? And then how do you think how do you think that the question, like what do you think it tests in terms of like knowledge for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think like I also worked for Prime Video like in the past. So it's
Oh,
like,
okay.
so my answer was a bit thorough because I kind of knew like what they would be looking for in this type of question. But to be honest, like Prime Video, we don't really like pre-launch content to a limited set of users for the problem which I described below,
Yeah.
problem which I described. But what we do is like launch out, let's say we're launching our Prime Video on a new country. So we specifically, and there's a new feature, for example, X-ray. So we only like ship that out to like 10K customers. So I think like it might be related to that particular problem statement. So I think like it's testing out your overall like framework which you think through this question, whether you are like analyzing the pros and cons of doing the certain thing. And also, for example, like your first thing is like, why do we really want to do this? Like, can you think of some use cases or scenarios where doing this particular thing might be useful? Second thing is like for the targeting criteria, are you thinking holistically about the overall like Prime Video, like the average Prime Video customer? What are some things that are important for a particular TV show to be successful, and how do you go about like figuring out the dimensions through which we want to look at while selecting these customers. And third one, I think like is more around like whether you're thorough with the experiment design or not. And also like how do you go about the various components over here, like hypothesis, primary metrics, then treatment versus control splitting, and also like post experiment analysis. So that's kind of like my perception of what this question is trying to check.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's some interesting sampling aspect of this as well that I feel like is undervalued a lot of the times, because you specifically, I liked how you mentioned like targeting like the people that actually want to watch this show and then like the general population, right? And I think a lot of this like slow experimentation kind of allows for the companies to really have better understandings of the metrics that really do drive like subscription or retention. Like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, like, you know, TV success is something that I think most of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, they've all kind of figured out to some degree, at least when they launch it, if it's going to be good or not. You know, obviously it is directly affecting and changing the way that we're watching television too, in terms of like kind of like how TikTok has changed the medium, where they probably like do a bunch of stuff to like hook you in and really get you to like watch the next episode and stuff like that. But I think that a lot of that is kind of like set in stone now, and like pretty much like there's probably dashboards of this even, I'm guessing, when they launch like new TV shows to this point where so the metrics are like almost set in stone. And it's just kind of that like understanding and working through the case and like knowing these metrics. But once you've seen it, like once you go on the job, you're not going to be like having to recreate these metrics. They've already been like very much like created by the company at that point, right? It's just kind of how like you can like come up with pretty good standards for it, essentially. So
exactly, like these like at least streaming companies are like so mature now, like most of the metrics have already built, even these experimentation like the design is already automated, so a lot of it is mostly around like, you know, like incremental improvements to already existing stuff over there.
Exactly. Yeah. Most of the software, it really is actually, you know, well kind of designed, well measured at this point. Unless they're introducing new things, you know, then that's going to be something different, new features, brand new features, you know, new platforms, all that stuff. Great. Awesome, Rahul.